Hello, Digital Warrior, and welcome back to the Forge of Unicorn podcast, where we explore the untapped potential of IT departments and the secret of digital evolution. Today, we are diving into the challenge of digital transformation and how a unicorn ecosystem requires a revolutionary perspective. Joining us is Oussama Glilah, a seasoned venture capital and co-managing director at Rise of Capital. Oussama has an impressive track record in identifying high-growth startups in frontier market, Asia and Middle East. And in his portfolio, he made some interesting growth with startups like iFarmer and Podio. Oussama, it's truly a pleasure to have here you as a guest. Thank you.
Hi, Mike. Pleasure to be with you on this podcast. So thank you for inviting
No
me.
need to mention it, Oussama. The pleasure is ours. Oussama, before we dive into today's topic, let's hear about your journey. I was impressed from your bio and the portfolio in your company. In Result Capital, I saw that you are focusing investing in this emerging market in Asia and the Middle East. But I was positively surprised, especially of two companies. iFarmer, because it's not conventional to me seeing IT applied in agriculture, and also Podio, because I was thinking that the field for podcast was almost saturated. Instead, you were able to secure a Series A investment expansion of more than 5,400,000. So, what inspired you to focus on this unique opportunity? And how do you consider your most defining contribution to fostering innovation on these regions?
To get to your question, I mean, look, there's plenty to really inspire someone to look at opportunities in frontier markets, right? It's extremely tough, so the inspiration has to be pretty high. Naturally, probably the first, let's say, you know, port of call or inspiration that would come my way is obviously opportunity and positive social impact, right? Um, you know, when you're doing VC investment, if you're looking to make money, which is really probably one of the primary factors, whether you like it or not, social impact and positive impact follows that with it, right? Because of the nature of capital scarcity in those markets. Um, we've gone and we've done tried and tested things which are made easier because of, when you see what others have done out there, like in more mature ecosystems, right? The real challenge for us, right, in fostering innovations in these overlooked regions is sort of taking those ideas that were tried and tested and then making it relevant for your demographic and your geography, so localizing it, right? So in one sense, sort of the innovation that we look for may not be what you see that comes out of, let's say East Asia or the West, but more like how do you take what has been developed and give an opportunity to people that are overlooked, right? To enjoy a similar quality of life or quality of, consumer experience um, as, peers in more mature markets, right? The defining contribution for us is simply giving people, founders, teams, a platform and belief, most importantly, because belief is a big thing, especially when you're overlooked, right? To go and make a success of their ventures and have belief in their ability to generate value for themselves, their stakeholders, and their communities.
Understood. I love this part of human-centric philosophy in
Yeah.
investments. And I guess that this is one of the biggest driver in identifying high potential ventures, isn't it?
Correct, definitely. Even in, I would say, in any market, right? At the end of the day, things are human driven. Whether you are American, Chinese, Japanese, British, Bangladeshi, Vietnamese, things are driven by humans, right? So how do you get to the human and how do you place them in a position to deliver at their best, ability, right? Which requires emotional intelligence, looking at personalities, then obviously you go into more objective things, right? Which is, total addressable market, product fit, the macros and micros, And then obviously, then when you look at the investment side of things, due diligence, pre-investment due diligence, and then post-investment, you know, hustling, follow-up, you name it.
Fantastic, fantastic. It's beautiful how this human-centered approach, it recalls me the concept in the book of Daniel Burrus, the anticipatory organization. Because if you see human being as the disruptor of digital innovation and technology innovation, this could be really a game changer. How do you see this theory aligning with your strategy in navigating in this high growth venture?
Thank you, Mike. That's actually a great question. And this question actually made me go and research the concepts of Daniel Burrus's book. So it's opened, the gateway for me to, increase my knowledge. But, my findings were that it actually aligns, by highlighting some of the things that we and, likely others also do organically and naturally, as you do something with full intent. For example, we fully intend to be like proactive. We take action to ensure that destiny is as much in our hands as possible, right? We do that by having multiple discussions and brainstorming meetings. Um, uh, we see how they can shape our reality, right? And then, the book, the theory goes into, how can you anticipate things? Right? So obviously, for us, I'm taking an emerging market lens, right? I'm not taking a mature market lens. Anticipating for emerging markets, I feel, is probably easier than anticipating if you're in a much faster paced mature market, right? Because it's
Yep.
just to reference my answer earlier in this chat of ours, we get to see what's happening outside of our markets, which tend to be 10 to 15 years ahead in terms of technological development and deployment and testing of that technology, right? But then we get the ability to then take what's tried and tested and then deploy it in a localized fashion, right? Um, Other parts of the theory looks at the importance of pre-solving problems, right? Um, I think obviously pre-solving problems is very, very important because that reduces the risk to getting into places where you have not anticipated certain challenges or there's certain gaps in the business or gaps in in how you're executing, right? Again, there's a lot of academic work, a lot of stuff that happens around the world that helps us to pre-solve, but then my mind goes, there's only so much that you can pre-solve, right? One part of venture is pre-solving, one part of venture, and really any business for that matter, is, having the ability to just deal things as they come. Some things come out of nowhere that you just don't expect.
Yes. Indeed, the concept of digital disruption or market disruption. I love it.
Correct.
Your accomplishment, Osama, brings to mind some systemic challenges that we have identified through our research into digital transformation, and especially in the failures that we have witnessed in these 14 years of research. Reflecting on the remarkable venture you have baked, it's evident that the patterns in success in creating unicorns often starkly contrast the average struggle we have observed in the broader market over the past decade. Specifically, we have highlighted 6 major problems organizations are facing. I would like to run by you. The first one is more an observation because we have researched for a long time, but in IT, it seems to be that there is a lack of professional standards. I mean, in software. And this is leading to a really variable quality, typically tending to the lower part of the quality spectrum. Reflecting on my experience in Formula One and MotoGP, I remember walking through the Ferrari halls, where every detail was exuding engineering mastery. It is striking how different this is from the software landscape, where typically we see code bases that are with poor quality. Do you think this gap is a missed chance to create potential unicorns? And how can organization evolve to bridge the quality gap and the standard absence in IT?
Thank you, Mike. This is actually a very interesting question because there's several ways to answer this, right? So obviously, if you want to answer it in a very simple format, yes, of course, right? If there's lack of professional standards, it limits your scale, it limits your growth, and it limits, things being as objective and as, quality based as possible, right? Now, upon my research, there's a few standards out there that do cover a few areas within IT, right? Like the IEEE Code of Ethics, security, technical, and quality standards that are done through various different ISO, numbers and stuff like that. You have
Yes.
also privacy standards, at least from the tech side, pushed by the EU, like GDPR, etc. Right?
Yep.
Now, the standards are there, but then how are they applied by the organization, and what is the consistency in which they are applied? Right? Now, if you're looking at a startup, look, it's quite tough to apply all the standards because when when you're a small team or you're bootstrapping or you're even at Series A, Series B, you're sort of scaling in a way where you need to prioritize survival of the company, growth, and obviously building the best product possible, right? To help you take you to that promised land of, becoming a unicorn. But then on the flip side, I think at least from our side of the world, you know, you do need to have the resources to hire the good talent, which is also lacking, but when you do find it quite expensive, right? To put in place the type of people who can put these standards within the organization, right?
Yes.
So it becomes a bit of like a chicken and egg problem, right? What came first, the chicken or the egg, right?
Exactly.
So what should a scaling startup with limited cash do? Spend money on hiring those people or spend money on growth? I would probably say spend money on growth so you make more money or more revenue in theory at least, right? And then you are able to attract the people to put these standards within the organization. So really it comes from managing from a leadership position and so on and so forth. Now, in the context of F1 and MotoGP, right? Um, these are amazing industries, highly, highly
Yeah.
competitive, and really the summit of their respective, let's say, worlds or sectors or whatever you want to call it, right? Um,
Yes, indeed.
they demand a lot from people, and for you to get to that summit, you really it's like a Air Force pilot. If you look at the statistics, I mean, the vast minority that enter training and then become Air Force pilots of these fighter jets make it to the top, right?
Exactly.
It's the same thing. You need sort of that passion, drive, love for what you do, and sacrifice um, to get to that level, and then have the ability to implement those standards, right? And then through that, you maintain the organization at the level that's expected.
It's beautiful how you have anticipated my second observation. So the discovery of the research, the second one is that indeed, probably due to this lack of standards, there is scarcity of high-performing talents in IT. So there are not that many highly skilled software engineers. And through the Software Craftsmanship Dojo that we have released as open source research to help organizations to grow, and your discussion, your point about grow and people and managers that are leaders that are helping people to grow in the right direction is indeed toward this approach of the dojo, is providing us some data that are really intriguing, and I want to provide it to you now. So we have screened in the last 14 years more than 100,000 people, sorry. And what emerged from screening all these people from startups to corporation, big corporation, is that on a technical point of view, only 3% roughly were with technical skills that resemble the base technical skills of a unicorn. So practices like test-driven development, ability to do good software design, and so on. But as you know pretty well, software is a kind of work that is mainly collaborative. And so we start to add also social engineering practices and tooling like sociometrics to measure how good is this profile in collaborating with others. And so after we add this new bar to the standards, the number dropped from 3 to less than 1%. Literally 0.9% of the candidates we have screened, they have technical and social skills to work in a highly performance environment. Now, Oussama, given your deep experience in back in transformative startup, how does these challenges of talent scarcity resonate with your observation? And which kind of strategy do you see are working effectively to cultivate this kind of talent? You said something that really intrigued me in the previous one, so I'm eager to listen now.
I mean, probably this alongside funding in our part of the world, that is, in South and Southeast Asia, and probably even MENA to some extent, where we invest as well. It's probably one of the biggest challenges, right? Is how do you find the right people, the right human resources, the right talent, the right skills, etc. The answer is you don't. You don't find them. You have to make them, right? Um, I would probably even say in other parts of the world it's the same, but specifically, at least in the context of where we invest, it's definitely, a big issue. And look, there's several reasons for that. Some of them are cultural. Some of them are because of just the way the ecosystem is set up. There's a lack of, or not a lack of, maybe that's the wrong word, more like there isn't sufficient amounts of individuals who are putting in their time and efforts within that ecosystem to advise people. And then when you go into the organization, the thing that, and let me just be clear, by the way, these organizations have, I mean, and this is without bias, right? But amazing founders, good leadership, etc., right? They're able to take companies from point A to point B to point C. But what they don't have, and maybe because it's overlooked or underappreciated, is, for example, proper HR department, career growth,
Yes,
proper training programs, leadership incentives, um, you know, uh, in some cases, the salaries to attain these people is out of reach. So then you're placed in a position where you have to train people. You have to, you know, that 0.9%, number of technical mastery in high performance environments, right? It's people that were given the opportunity to really build their skill set and be around people to influence them and give them the knowledge to get to where they need to get to in their life, right? So really the effort here and really what differentiates leaders from non-leaders is how do you create a system or environment where you build up someone's skills, right? You build up, you give them their career path, and then obviously you show them, okay, this is where you can get to. Then when people can see the light at the end of the tunnel, right, they will make it to that 0.9% and hopefully greater.
I love it. Yes, indeed. And I see the same pattern also in sport. As a judo and jiu-jitsu trainer, I see the people they can arrive to a certain point with their talent, but without a good coach, a good training and upskilling program, they cannot become a professional athlete.
100%.
And this is indeed what I observe also in software. You don't find talents on the street. Typically, you breed them in your company.
Exactly. And think like, in the context of sports, right? Think about how much investment. I mean, I love football, right? So, just from that lens, think of how much investment, a football club has to place in someone that joins when they're like 10 years old or 9 years old, right? To get them,
Yes,
and they don't even usually start in a team till they're 18, right? So you're putting investment of like 9 years through coaching staff, through looking after them, through all that stuff, right?
exactly.
And really that player starts to return because when do players peak? Between like, let's say 25 to 30. That's just the average. Some earlier, some later, whatever, right?
Yep.
But then you're investing technically almost 15 to 16 years in an individual for them to peak and give you, quote unquote, a return on investment.
Yes. And then this return of investment is massive, as we know from football.
Yeah, in theory.
Yeah, yeah. Good. Amazing. And this is a fascinating discussion because what we observe is indeed due to this scarcity of talents and due to what you also recall in the discussion, HR departments that are not equipped to find talents on the market and neither to grow them in the company, what we observe is that the average company has a tendency to onboard people with low skill level. And because of this, what we observe is a culture of mediocrity that stifles innovation. With culture of mediocrity, what we mean is the compound of behaviors of the individual in a company. They are not the behavior of an high performer, not a behavior of somebody that is working, for instance, in Ferrari F1 or in a professional football team. Let's say amateur, okay? And this, at the end, result that the larger majority of people, they are behaving in a level of performance that will never reach the peak performance. That being said, is an interesting concept that I want to move to you as a question. Because in the company that you have baked with investment, it seems that they are doing differently. So I'm asking myself how this kind of organization that are stuck typically in mediocrity in your portfolio, instead they were able to go beyond it. How do you unlock their full potential?
Okay, so there's a bunch of tools, right? First of all, we're taking the assumption that, the mediocrity can be gone beyond, right? Because sometimes when you're stuck, right? So with that assumption, obviously it first starts with hiring practices. Are you hiring tier A people, tier B, tier C? Or if you are hiring tier B, tier C, through, keeping in mind also the previous questions that, you've asked and the conversation we've had, can you train them? Can you upgrade them from a tier C, tier B, tier A, right? That obviously that exists. Um, but also just as importantly as hiring practices, it's leadership mindset, right? Where does the mediocrity come from? Is it, it's not like the company is mediocre or, it's just by default things are mediocre. There's someone or something at the top that, creates the mindset and the culture within the organization, and that comes from the leadership, right? So you also need to look at the leadership. But then also, if the leadership is creating an environment of mediocrity, but it's a good leadership, then then there's a deeper problem. Are there the right incentives? Is compensation in place? Are people being looked after? Right? Even if you're a founder that has a big stake or a relatively big stake in a company, right? Are they being motivated to spend 12 hours a day, 5 to 6 days a week, even seven sometimes as needed to keep this company alive, right? For 2, 3 years nonstop, probably even longer, right? Um, to perform at the highest level possible and just not be a mediocre organization. And then finally, right, other things to battle this mediocrity. And what we've tried in our portfolio companies is, be it through board meetings, through executive committees, through our shareholder agreements, and then obviously compensation is accountability, right? How accountable are individuals, and how will this accountability affect them, and how will it motivate them to ensure they do what's best for the organization, and aligning the interests of the organization with its stakeholders, right? So
Yes.
from my experience, that's how I would combat mediocrity, at least.
Okay, I love it. And is indeed what you are telling me is indeed resonating with the two next discovery of the research. The first that I would like to highlight is what we observe is the market is behaving differently that you were referring to. And this indeed confirms why your companies they can grow and the others they are stuck in mediocrity. Because what we observe typically is that a company that is stuck in mediocrity, they have the tendency to onboard a consultant that they are providing them the illusion to perform a digital transformation in a traditional way. What we observe and we bake our data with McKinsey and Boston Consulting and other big players that are doing digital transformation is that typically the success ratio of a digital transformation is very low, despite the gigantic amount of money we are investing in that. The data from last year is that only last year were invested globally 2.5 trillions in digital transformation to adopt the latest digital technology. But because the digital transformation in the canonical way are not upskilling the human side of an organization, only 7% of the companies that are doing digital transformation, that roughly the report is telling us that are 91% of the overall companies worldwide, are reporting a return of investment. So it means that 2.5 trillions of money almost were wasted globally because only 7% was able to see or perceiving a return of investment. The scary part to me is the forecast for the future due to the disruption of AI. With Gen AI especially, the forecast is that in 26-27 will be a rise in digital transformation between 4 and 5 trillions. That is roughly 10% of the global GDP. Is a gigantic amount of money. The question for you, Oussama, is given your experience in a startup able to disrupt and innovate, what are the steps that you think an organization must take in order to go beyond these traditional digital transformation and frameworks? How they can adapt to be resilient and to be disrupting in a meaningful change, human side, as you were telling at the beginning.
Look, the steps for an organization to take to go beyond this really depends on the organization, right? So there's no set answer or one size fits all for, the organization in terms of what it needs to do, right? It needs to look at, how large is the organization? Is it a young company, mature company, etc., right? And then be able to build a framework, to deal with these sort of things, right? How do they adapt their strategy, resilience and you were saying relevance and, to create meaningful change? Um, to be honest, I'm going to answer this with something that is probably one of the few things that was pretty useful for me from my business degree, right? And that's Maslow's hierarchy of needs,
Oh, I love it.
which, yeah, I mean, it's a pretty good theory if you
Yes.
really consider it, because it looks at it on a human level, right? Because what is the question framing? The question is looking at, like, how do we make sure that even with all of the disruption that's happening, how do you make sure that things still move forward and things are meaningful, right? And it's still a human-driven thing. So obviously, for the listener that may have limited, knowledge on this theory, it's pretty simple. Just look it up, Maslow's. But it just looks at a pyramid figure, which looks at the basic requirements of a human being, going from basic survival, so like needing food and clothing and stuff like this, which hits the psychological aspect. Then safety, which is job security, and then having belonging or community, which comes through friendship or having colleagues in the workplace that you get along with, or there's respect, etc. And then esteem, which comes from shared success, right? Individual and shared success. And then finally, self-actualization, right? When I started to, think of these things, I was like, you know what? Maslow actually did a pretty good job at really simplifying the different stages of a human that's needed for them to deliver and to deal with all of the change that's happening in society today, right? And then ultimately getting to, let's say, um, the peak, which is self-actualization, which very few people, in the world ever really reach, right? People usually get lost. I mean, in all stages, unfortunately,
Yes.
right? They get lost either lack of job security, lack of food and clothing, lack of community, etc., right?
Yes.
For many reasons that we won't get into. But if you create an environment that is able to tend to each of these needs that Maslow has pointed out, right? I'm not saying everyone in the organization needs to self-actualize, but if you can get to as many as possible be it job security, community. Obviously, through job security, you have the food and clothing aspect, and then the shared, success gives people their esteem, right?
Yes.
I think this is how um, organizations can go beyond ineffective frameworks because people will have the motivation to build what's best for the organization and how you create strategies that ensure resilience, relevance, or fosters resilience, relevance, and meaningful change to withstand fast-moving things like you pointed out, Gen AI and all of this investment that's going in that's disrupting. I mean, to be honest, before this podcast, I got into I saw a news article where DBS in Singapore is going to be letting go of 1,000 people, temporary workers, so like contract-based people, not permanent employees, and being replaced by AI, right? So you're already seeing, these sort of things shifting. But then the question is, what will be interesting to see is, how will DBS look like moving forward,
Yes.
and other organizations that, undertake these sort of things.
I like your point. Are 2 years indeed that I am observing the layoff from companies that are official layoff or a sub-official layoff with buyout campaigns. But indeed, the market is reshaping. And the point that you have moved the digital transformation on human level, that is indeed where is failing, is really remarkable from your side. And it's beautiful how you are connecting immediately to the next point. That is the human-centric repercussion or side effect of all this mediocrity and pressure from the market and the company. So we have run a few research in collaboration with other partners, and what we have discovered is indeed the market is full of people that are disengaged and burnout. And with full, I mean the data are pretty dramatic because 77% last year reported to be disengaged, silently or loudly. Also, 38% of employees they are reporting to be or to have been during the year in burnout. Disengagement and burnout are related to social issues because the disengagement is creating a big loss of productivity, and with big, the report from last year are discussing about 8.9, almost 9 trillions of dollars lost due to disengagement. But also the 38% of burnout is dramatic because burnout can lead to depression with all the social consequence of it. So the human side is really in danger from this pressure from the market. So the point that I would like to understand your stance is, given your experience with this high-performing startup, how do you think business can address this challenging in disengagement and loss of human centricity and engagement, well-being, to achieve a productivity that is at the same time a fulfillment for the people that are working and profitable for the company?
Look, great question, as all the questions have been so far.
Thank you.
Um, Look, there's a few ways to look at this. Number one, right, is mental health, right, which you pointed out, depression. I think one thing that gives me optimism in our time and age is that mental health is something that's being increasingly prioritized, right, and recognized as something that's real, and something that's as important as your physical health, right? As well as because that affects your emotional health, and then that stuff leads to your burnout anyways and the lost productivity. That's one. Number two, it goes back to the previous answer within, the hierarchy of needs, of community, job security, etc., support and esteem. That helps you deal with also, all the requirements to be as productive as possible. But then finally, looking at it from, let's say, a digital or IT lens, right? And I know this might sound like an easy answer, but with all of my brainstorming, really it comes down to AI, right? Maybe my answer would have been different 5 or 10 years ago. Not maybe, it would definitely been different. But today, AI, at least to the wider public, exists in the
Yes.
form of, automation, LLMs, stuff like that. Um, and doing simple tasks, repetitive tasks, uh, can't, takes away from, your focus, takes from energy, like anything else. Your energy, you have finite energy over, I don't know, whatever X amount of hours that you're awake, and you spend it on X amount, just like your bank account. You have X amount of money, and this is how much you can spend.
Yes.
AI gives you savings, right? Where it can really help you, save your energy for more important things, right? And I'll give you some, practical examples. At least for me, um, now I use AI for, writing up documents. Obviously, I don't let the AI write up the document for me, but helping reword things, spell checks. At some point, AI will allow us, once it's got into a sufficient level of trust, allow us to generate entire documentation that then the energy required from the human, instead of having to create the document, is to review the document. Obviously, the human still needs to know the data. That will never go away. You need to know the data. It's the
Yes.
knowledge, right? But what the AI will do is it will take care of all of the heavy lifting that you need to do, right? And allow you to invest it in other places that will generate more value for yourself and for the organization.
I love your point. I love how you stated it very clearly that still the human knowledge is the most precious stuff, and the AI will help to be like an
Oh,
assistant
yeah, absolutely.
that can
Yeah.
heal all the cognitive power that is used during the job due to content switching, due to high pressure and high stress. I like it.
Yeah.
And
I mean,
yeah,
yeah, sorry,
no, no,
Mike.
go ahead.
Just to add, the human is fallible, right?
Yes,
The human can make mistakes.
yes,
And the more you're burnt out, the more mistakes you're going to make and the more lost productivity you have.
yes,
So, in that context as well, right? If you reduce the mistakes, and as you mentioned, AI is there to assist and augment rather than to replace.
yes.
I think this is how you will avoid burnout and increase
Yeah,
productivity.
this is something that I strongly believe. AI is or assistant is the partner, like in Rally the navigator is not the driver. Yeah.
Exactly.
The last point that we observe is an intriguing one that I want to understand your point of view. Because in the past 2 decades, we observe the myth of universal playbook. Companies that they were looking to embrace agile, blindly, Scarlet Agile, then DevOps. Now there is AI, and because we are discussing about AI, I'm looking forward to understand your point of view. Because what we observe is that typically companies are embracing it blindly. They arrive, they put the blueprint, and they have to do exactly what was written in the blueprint. But they forget about their culture, how the people behave, their belief, their biases. So the point that I want to break down with you is how do you see this cookie cutter strategy? And in your experience, are there philosophies that are successful or elements that brings the success for the company to become a unicorn and to achieve and exceed their goal?
Look, the cookie cutter strategy, right? The one size fits all, etc. Um, Specifically for like large organizations with, or even government, let's say, with legacy system, distributed teams, and high regulatory demands, right? They might find some of these frameworks pretty inadequate.
Mm-hmm.
Um, I believe there are, quite a few approaches out there, universal approaches, right? uh, of which there's Agile and Scaled Agile and DevOps one, and there's also another five that I found, such as business IT alignment, which is good for large enterprises, human-centered IT, good for customer-facing services, cloud first, digital first, which is businesses looking to modernize, or in this case also, in some cases government, as I said earlier, buy model, where it's organization needing to maintain legacy but also modernize, which is also to some extent government. So, and then you have service management approach, which is strong regulation or has service needs, right? Now, since I've mentioned government a few times, you could already see a pattern where, just, government alone has the requirement of two or three sort of playbooks, two or three approaches needed, right? And the reason why I mentioned government is it tends to be like at the state, it's sometimes, not in every country, pretty big. You're managing a lot, and if you're a large country, I mean, you're overseeing millions and millions, in some case, 1 billion plus people, right? So in many ways, I also would probably say that the defined approaches, they might not even be enough in on their own. Sometimes you need to have approaches that overlap with each other, or you may even need to start creating your own approach, depending on where you are in the world, the context,
Yes,
your culture, your geography, the people you're dealing with, the systems you're dealing with, the security requirements, etc., etc. Right? The truth is, every organization is unique. Every entity is unique.
yes,
If you go for a one size fits all, you're just not going to have a good result. It's just, common sense.
indeed.
You need to look at, the culture makeup, the customer base, the stakeholders. You need to take a very holistic view to really be able to conclude on what is the best approach for the organization.
I love that you said holistic because indeed is what we believe. That has to be holistic and you have to bring the wisdom from the others, but then craft your own approach
Definitely.
because it's the evolution of your organization.
Absolutely.
Good. I love how it's turning out all this discussion about the six dysfunction or six anti-patterns that we observe, because now it seems the perfect time to ask you about your perspective. So your companies, they look different. So has to be something different that you are doing. And what I'm curious is if you are able to share with the audience, if there are any specific example of story you would like to share about your portfolios companies. Might be related to AI or whatever. Do you feel intriguing?
So, such as, like in terms of how they've used AI or digital transformation?
About how they work, how you see them different than the six dysfunction we have just described.
Okay, I mean, um, each company is pretty different, right? I think one thing to keep in mind is, and we're talking about the approaches, right? How do they fit into the approaches we just
Yeah,
discussed,
they
correct?
grow to become
Yeah,
unicorns.
okay. Yeah. So, first of all, the only thing, or not the only, but one of the few things they have in common is they're all pretty young, early stage, fast growth companies, hungry, um, David versus Goliath, if you will.
Hmm.
You know what I
Yep.
mean? So in that sense, this is where they would probably go closer towards, the agile, principle, right?
Okay.
Um, Agile and maybe, I would say some DevOps, right?
Okay.
Um, Probably also a bit of design thinking.
Oh, okay.
So like a combo of those three, right? The human-centered IT transformation approach. Um, so the reason why I picked those three specifically, or the ones that have come to my mind, is obviously the agile is continuous improvements, eliminating waste, and iterative value delivery. Now that sounds like a mature company, and probably that also works for mature companies. But the key for a startup is doing it at a faster pace. That sort of mindset, right? So that you're able to convince the end user, the customer, to use you, and therefore giving you the growth that you need. And then when I pointed out sort of the human-centric design thinking approach, right, is, from my research, the principles are empathizing with end users, iterating solutions on feedback, and solving real business problems. That's startup mindset 101, right?
Yes.
It's you're creating, you're sort of, I mean, I don't really, this doesn't super apply to our world, but it's really, the mentality in America is like break things and see what sticks together, right? So if you want to translate it into how this principle or this sort of approach, is deciphered, is really creating the product or offering the service, seeing with the end user how they're receptive to it, getting the feedback from it, and um, iterating the solution. And anyways, those startups have come as a result of real business problems for the most part, right? So in the case of, let's look at our Bangladeshi portfolio. We have Bongo. There was a lack of digital content for Bangladeshi movies anywhere in the world. That was a real business problem. Okay, fine. You've had Netflix for 10 to 15 years. So it goes back to what I said earlier in the podcast about, things being already done outside and then localizing it. Then we have iFarmer, a company that, that we just invested in. Um, in Bangladesh, you have 10% of the country are smallholder farmers, right? And the majority of them just have no financing, they have no leasing, they have no insurance, they have nothing, right? So iFarmer has come in and has been able to create a sort of platform to, to facilitate financing and to give insurance and these sort of things to farmers to help them attain prosperity. And the platform, by the way, was iterated with feedback from those farmers. So like
Okay.
the farmer would take X, Y, Z from iFarmer, but then they would come back to iFarmer and say, but do you have this product available? Or do you have this type of financing available, etc., right?
Yes.
Um,
So customer centricity.
so yeah, and then finally, like maybe just, out of another company we just invested in Philippines, right? Microinsurance brokerage called RuleNet. Fantastic company. Great founder as well, just like all the other companies we invested in. They're like my children, so I have to be biased. You know what I mean? Um, um, so they do microinsurance brokerage for the rural areas of Philippines. And, they looked at what type of insurance products can we offer to, the Filipino person in the rural areas. And it was basically life insurance. And what is life insurance for them there? It's not like in the West where someone dies and you get a payout. It's more like someone has died. I don't have money to cover the funeral costs. So, you know, I need insurance for that. And then basically, RuleNet was able to tailor their product to specifically cater to that segment. And through that, they were able to get a lot of initial traction.
Wonderful. It's fantastic how in all these stories the behavior of the people working in this organization are synced with the customer, and so the culture is so innovative. I love it. I really love it.
Totally. I want just to add one last thing, Mike, just to make the answer more full for you. It's also finally, I mean, there's one approach that I did not mention, which is the data-driven decision making approach, which is AI analytics, which also plugs into sort of the theme of the podcast in terms of, how does digital transformation help the organization? And that is after you've gotten the initial traction, sort of also embedding that approach into your organization using data analytics and machine learning and, human knowledge and stuff like that to be able to then take all these other approaches that have been highlighted and delivering the best value you can for your stakeholders.
I love it, and it's fantastic how it's so deeply coupled with the research that we are running. Because for us, it's holistic, it's data driven, and is from investor to user. Because this is the real chain of investment and then return of investment. Happy user means a happy return of
Correct.
investment of everybody and wellness for all the people around the investment. I love it.
A happy wife, happy life.
Exactly. Happy customer, happy investor.
Yeah. Yeah.
Good.
Exactly. Yeah.
Now, we are almost wrapping up this call, and I have a last closing question for you. And this, if there is one piece of advice you will offer to our founders, leaders, investors that are or listeners at the podcast, that they are trying to navigate these challenges in digital transformation phase, what do you suggest, or which would it be the suggestion that you have for them?
I mean, look, my one piece of advice is also probably, pretty straightforward one, is that you are not a one-man show. And although I don't think people do believe that they are one-person shows, um, they do believe that they are, or they do desire to take on as much as possible, which ends up, just, having reduced productivity, reduced return on anything. right? You are only a human being. You have people around you to leverage to make things happen. And, those people in the context of like, let's say IT, digital transformation, and integrating these sort of things to help you reach to this promised land of becoming a unicorn or success, right? You need to leverage the best people around you and teams of people and groups of people around you to be able to implement these things and adopt the best innovation possible to keep you ahead of everyone else, right? So trust in those around you. Put in the best effort, do it with good intent, leverage all of the innovation you can around you, and then let the execution tie the knot for you to get to where you need to.
Fantastic. Thank you, Oussama.
That's my pleasure.
So, thank you for sharing all this insight today. And it's impressive how your journey highlights the immense potential of IT departments and startups that are approaching the growth of their company in a strategical way. For our listener, if today's discussion resonates with you, check out the Forge of Unicorn newsletter where we explore this topic in greater depth. And remember, evolution, not transformation, is the key to unlock true IT potential. Until next time, stay curious and keep evolving. Oussama, thank you for being our guest, and see you off there in the wild of startups as soon as possible.
Thank you for having me, Mike, and I wish you a great, great year ahead.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
Thanks for listening, and please remember to subscribe to the Forge of Unicorns to stay up to date with our latest episodes.